another Daftloday response video to another bold assertion. Particles can't explain mystery of light interference in interferometry. Again, you can't even demonstrate that there is light interference in interferometry. So, I don't think you're going to be able to meet the burdens of evidence sufficient to make your declarations of the truth. I think your truth declarations are just your own bold assertions with no reasoned evidence.
Oakley dokley. Where does the light go?
It's already been demonstrated, but go ahead. Attempt your description.
This diagram I got from Wikipedia, and I think it's interesting to note that it doesn't illustrate in any way the notion of light returning to the source. Now, I know.
Yeah, right. So that's just typical of the fact that the science is so underdone, that all of these systems and devices and processes and experiments are simplified, and you say to some purpose for public communication or consumption. But I would argue that the reason why it doesn't talk about it is because it isn't friendly to the woo-woo experiment. It is counter evidence to the theory that the whole thing is premised on. So the Huygens and Heisenberg woo doesn't make any sense if you start including the fact that, oh wait a minute, it's not light plus light equals dark. It's no, the light can go this way, and when the light one photon goes this way, it means the other photon next to it's going to go the other way. That kind of logic is involved. The right hand and the left hand are manipulating the experiment. It isn't a bunch of left hands created out of nothing. There is conservation.
In a recent video, the professor kind of says that, but
well, you can watch the MIT laser videos. There's one of those where he actually puts the card in. He says, see, this is where the light's going. And then they put another interferometer in the experiment to actually have the light go to another board and be projected. So then the two directions, the two return trips are then side by side, and you can see that when one's on, the other one's off, and and they just are opposite, exactly reversed, essentially in their function. I would say it's not even exactly reversed, which is the interesting part in terms of the intensity. So you know that some of the light is getting lost somewhere, and some of that lost light enables the two patterns not to match, because sometimes the lost light seems to be one kind of light.
Well, let's not suspend that.
And I mean by lost, I'm talking about the diffraction again. So the idea is these beams of light are diffracting through this experiment, and the more mirrors you have, the longer the distance, the more they're diverging, not diffracting, diverging. And that divergence means that, especially when you're using optics, as they did in the laser experiment, to create the projection that you can see very well, the light is projecting beyond the lens, and therefore there are losses that are built into this experiment that no one's accounting for. The light you get at the end, the signals, the two signals of the return trip, if you add them up, are not the intensity of the original laser.
The point is that I have here today is that you can't in a particle model give account for how particles can be returning to the source.
I don't know why you can't. Of course they would return to the source. They're going through a half mirrored interferometer, I mean a beam splitter. Well, why can't they go back to the source? It's a half mirrored instrument. Of course they can go back. It's a silly assertion.
The reason is quite simple, is that
Good luck.
what we have here is a beam splitter. And
I have this sped up.
half the particles go one way from the source, and half go the other way.
Let's understand that hasn't ever been even proven. So I mean in the sense that I've seen no experiment where they actually account for how much energy they're shooting at the mirror and seeing if the total brightness of the two beams actually equals what was put in, and that some of it isn't getting consumed as heat by the mirror, or perhaps maybe some of the photons are actually being converted back into like gravitons or whatever the more fundamental form of the photon would be, that they're being converted back into a ton of no frequency. So I haven't even seen evidence of these assertions. So we just keep making these axioms of fact. This is the fact of how things are, and these aren't facts that one can be certain are actually facts. They're just assumed facts. And I'd argue that some of this is important enough where maybe there should be some demand that you first shore up these conclusions before you assert them as facts.
When we have a bright spot,
And yellow is not a great idea.
you can understand this as, in a particle model, as the returning and recombining.
Okay, in a particle model, there's no recombining, okay? So it's just nonsense. There's a single photon goes to the experiment. The single photon either takes one path or goes through. If it goes through, it has a certain things that'll happen to it, and then it makes the return trip, and then it has two choices at the return trip. It goes through or it reflects. Those are the options here. So there's no recombining of something. That's your assertion. That's your assumption. That's your philosophy. That's your religion. But in my opinion, it's not one that you've demonstrated to be an actual fact, that anything is recombined, that anything in the first place was split apart, that somehow individual photons were broken in half, and they did some sort of duality thing where they created separate individual photons that are somehow intertwined or entangled, and that the entangled photons somehow recombined in a new form because of their difference in their trips. These are all your speculations. I'm saying if I put single photons into that experiment, just like the two-slit experiment, you'll get exactly the same results. This has nothing to do with photons interacting with photons.
Of particles. Now, with adjustments on the distance of one of the mirrors, we get.
It's amazing that he's making this bold assertion in this really slow video that's only 8 minutes long. I mean, I'm already halfway through the video, so he thinks he's going to make some decisive argument in this video, and you can just see this doesn't have any of the, this doesn't look at all like a video worthy of this completely exaggerated title. There will be no proof of how particles can't do something in this tripe video, and this is as constant as a tactic. He does this all the time. He just preposterously exaggerates the evidence and claims and the authority of the claims he makes. This will be complete garbage as a proof. 4 minutes and it's not even close. It hasn't made one assertion that has any demonstrable provability.
The dark spot.
And if there's a dark spot there, that means the photon took the other path. If you shoot one photon in and you get a dark spot on that path, that means the photon's coming right back towards the emitter, and that's where it's going. That's where there's a light spot.
But whether we have a dark spot or a light spot, what can be done at any point in time is to block one of the paths with a piece of card, and then one gets a less intense pattern. And
Hello?
removing the card.
Hello? Hello?
This is Verizon with an urgent message regarding the outstanding balance on your final bill that can...
Yeah, fuck you cunts. I've been arguing with these assholes. You know, Verizon, I disconnected my phone service. You know, so I just get internet from them because they were soaking me for it. And so I went to using, I always been using Magic Jack, but I just put my regular phone on Magic Jack, right? And I did like 4 weeks ago. And now I can't, if I sign into my account, it says I have an $83 credit. They say I owe $100 and whatever dollars. And I really do probably owe $100 and something dollars. But I can't pay it on my account online. And I've literally spent hours them trying to fix it. They can't even get into my account. And they keep doing these robocalls. And I'm just saying these companies are so obnoxious. They fuck something up and they just automatically convict the consumer. They're guilty. And they harass them with robot calls. I mean, it's just disgusting that they can get away with this, that we put up with this as a civilization, that we get treated like this by these ragged motherfucking companies that are stealing excessive fucking graft from us. They're fucking giving us this service for these preposterously excessive rates. We don't pay for the actual service we get. We pay to advertise to suckers, to sell fucking ESPN and sports channels and do all this other fucking bullshit. And this is how we get goddamn treated, and you fucking cunts keep accepting this as what life on Earth should look like. I mean, it's just disgusting. Fucking scumbags. And your choice is Comcast, another disgusting company. I mean, it just absolutely sucks. Anyway, I'll back up a little. Continue.
The less intense pattern. And removing the card restores the particular image.
Right, so now he's obviously making the experiment more complicated and explaining how the two paths have changed the outcome. And the simple argument is there's a million explanations for why when you block one path, why you get signal on or off on the end, because it's the other path is still making the choice to take the other direction, so it's still only half the light goes one way, half the light that goes the other way. And the fact is it's still interacting and reflecting within these mirrors. Like I said, there's no evidence that the pattern itself is actually created by the light being combined. The evidence suggests is that the light is reflecting inside the thin film. The fact that there's a change in the medium going from air to glass and then to a thin film that's inside the glass, that all these transitions have an impact. So there's nothing remarkable about this. This isn't evidence of anything.
At the time. No particle model no thinking in terms of particles is really going to explain for us.
So when you do this kind of thing, when you make an assertion for which you're claiming that somehow you've studied all the particle explanations, that you somehow have knowledge of all of them, and that you can just make this bold assertion that there's no conceivable way that a particle model could explain the outcomes, I think that's preposterous. I don't think you've done any such thing. And again, this is the assertion from the, oh, you can't possibly explain how, our complexity through evolution. That's nonsense. We're related to apes. Oh, that's silly. You're just making assertions. You're not going to provide any evidence of how it's not possible, or how you've done any study, or how you even understand the theory of evolution. You're just saying I'm debunking it by just dismissing it as, how could you possibly think something as magical as this on-off pattern could be created by some mechanism besides my magical combining of photons?
How the particles are in some way changing their minds and deciding to, let's say, return.
They don't change their minds. It's a stream of photons. There's no mind changing. Again, so this is just nonsense. They don't stop going the other way. Anyway, this is just absolute nonsense.
To the source, okay? In the orthodox and classical explanation of this experiment, the only sense...
So now orthodox means classical. Again, it's just, what does that even mean? How do I make any sense of that? Don't you mean in the Feynman explanation or something, or in some other... Can you give me a date now instead of doing this nonsense? Could you say in the 1650 explanation, or in the 1805 explanation, or in the 1935 explanation? I mean, this idea of calling it orthodox, and classical, how is that informative?
In which we have a returning to the source is that when we have out of phase cancellation here, we have in phase addition of waveforms here, resulting in constructive interference as opposed to destructive interference.
Yeah, and the simple particle explanation is no, there's individual photons and they take one path or the other. They don't take both paths. They don't do any destructive interference with each other. They go that way. I mean, I don't understand how you've disproven the they go that way theory.
Interference. And the take-home point is that energy is preserved.
Amazing. I completely am mystified how you think you have demonstrated in some way why it's not possible that the photon goes this into the mirror, bounces up, bounces back, goes back to the source. Or, when you block this path. I mean, obviously when you block this path, you're saying nothing's going any further than here. So all these photons are destroyed. So the only photons in the experiment now are these photons. That's it. There's no other path. So what have you demonstrated? Of course, half of them will go back this way, half of them will go through. But I don't understand how you've made any argument here whatsoever. How would an individual photon navigate this experiment?
So I don't see how a particle model of light can explain the classic interferometry. experiment.
Okay, so again, it's in this context that I first must accept that there is such a thing as combining photons. That there isn't such a thing as when photons hit a medium, that they affect the medium by hitting it, and that other photons will be affected by the effect they create in the medium. So if something creates ripples in the water, that anything else that's now going to be interacting with the water will now be interacting with the rippled water, and that rippled water won't make it react the same way. It won't reflect straight anymore, because now it's reflecting off a curved surface. So exactly how have you demonstrated that that's not the truth? Did you do this experiment with single photons and demonstrate how there's something called interference that's happening with the photon? No. So there's no evidence that you don't either get a photon that goes one way or a photon that goes the other way. You haven't demonstrated that that isn't the explicit truth, that one photon travels one path or it travels the other path in a 50-50 relationship. Well, whatever. This was very disappointing. I mean, there's just nothing here. There's just nothing, and it certainly doesn't account at all for what I think I demonstrated in the other video by showing the lens on top of the piece of glass, on top of a piece of glass, and having just a layer of dust between the two pieces of glass. No interferometer, no magic, no creative stuff at all. And the fact is, it creates exactly the on-off pattern, the interference pattern. But it's obviously not an interference pattern. It's just caused by mechanical refraction. There's nothing else but just mechanical refraction. There's no combining of photons. The photon either bounces just once, or it bounces twice, or it bounces 3 times, or it bounces 5 times. But that's all there is. There's just how many times did the photon bounce before it exited the glass. Nothing else. No other explanation needed. You know, and in between where the peak bouncing points, I think I could illustrate that actually, but we'll see. My drawing skills are limited with these programs. Title, I guess that's what it's called. Okay, so here's your oh, I can't do it. That tool isn't going to work. I need a robust tool. Give me one of these spray guns or something. All right, so here's your surfaces, and what's the argument being made is the light comes in, and let's put it at an angle just to make it visual, because it comes in, it goes back and forth really close to itself, but let's just put it in an angle so you get the idea. And that what it's going to happen is it's going to refract, and there's a likelihood of this happening, depending on how thin the surface is and how many surfaces there are. The idea is the light can come out of any one of these paths. It could go this way, it can be coming this way, it could be coming this way, it could be coming this way, it could be coming this way. It could go this way, it could go this way, it could go this way, it could go this way. All of these are part of that probabilistic equation, and that is the on-off pattern right here. I mean, let's use a color. You know, here's your off, your empty, here's your empty, here's your empty, here's your empty, here's your empty. No big mysterious event here. This is, and that is consistent with the rings not being at all matching the interference pattern of the two-slit experiment. In a sense, these rings that are created in the interferometer do have an imbalance in their thickness. The first reflection seems bigger than the second and the third and the fourth, and that could be the very function of the fact that you have, in fact, maybe as many as 4 surfaces. You have the outer glass layers, and then you have the 2 internal surfaces of the thin film that constitutes the diffraction gradient, and that the light can reflect deep off the very bottom, creating a thick beam, a thick empty space, let's say, or it can be refracting off any one of these layers. So, but that's the real cause here. It's just refraction in terms of going from one medium to another, and there is also evidence that when you go from this medium that has a higher index, so this glass medium, okay, has an index of 1.5, the air medium has an index of 1, and every time you go from a smaller index to a heavier index, you have in any reflection, so as soon as you have a point of reflection, you end up what I argue is a U-turn scenario that changes the phase of the light. You have a phase shift of, you know, the appropriate 90 degrees or whatever, caused by that mechanical function alone. Not a change in distance, theoretically, but a change in distance, because if this is true, that this is a U-turn it's taking through the material, that's a consumption of, that's the creation of a longer distance. No need for an ether to do it. The material's doing it. And why the material does it, when this photon hits, it's also, I got to change the color of this thing. It's irritating, it's the wrong, reverse colors. When this photon hits, it's, in my opinion, in my argument, changing this structure and changing the probability of what will happen to the next photon, because the next photon's now hitting a surface in tension, and you know it's doing this U-turn thing here, which is creating a change in the pressure along this whole gradient, which means any other subsequent photon hitting this surface will have a change in its probability of whether it's going to reflect or whether it's going to be transmitted through the material. So this is the complex geometry that can perfectly account for the phenomenon. And for you to keep claiming that no, there's no evidence, the particles can't possibly provide an explanation, there can be no mechanical obvious description that's simple and we see demonstrated in all kinds of other mechanisms, and that we have physical experiments demonstrating that you don't need a slit, you don't need to do the Heisenberg confinement. No Heisenberg confinement required. Just put one piece of glass on top of another piece of glass, okay, with a layer of dust between them, and you'll create these fringes. No Huygens or Heisenberg required. And for you to claim that you've demonstrated something, or you have the authority of evidence and reasoning and logic to make assertions that no particle model can do it, I mean, what, you know, it's just evidence of your lack of credibility as a spokesperson, a defender of reasoning, because there's no reasoning involved in these bold assertions founded on vacuous and non-existent evidence. You proved nothing. You brought no evidence to the trial, and yet here you are in closing arguments talking about how, look at how we demonstrated, it's all bullshit and they can't possibly, their theory can't possibly be right. And you provided nothing. I mean, oh. And somebody is surprised that I find conversation with you obnoxious? Oh, amazing.